Help support the show by going to the Amazon.com search bar on the FBIA podcast webpage when doing your online shopping. From movies to groceries, Amazon has everything. Go to the website and use our show's search box to help send 10% of your purchase to the show. The search box will take you right back to the Amazon webpage. No extra cost to you, just support for the show. Again, that's FBIApodcast.com and look for the search box just under our logo.
Shut up and sit down.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Football is America with Ron and Keil. I'm Ron.
I'm Kyle. Today we are joined by Jeanna Thomas, who is one of the great staff authors from the Falcoholic.com, which is the Atlanta Falcons news and blog site, part of the SB Nation blogging community. We have Jeanna here to talk Falcons with us today. Jeanna, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jeanna, definitely excited. You talked to us just a little before we started recording. You are definitely going to be an expert. I'm actually pretty psyched right now. How long have you been a fan of the Falcons?
You know, honestly, in the grand scheme, not that long. I'm originally from Ohio, and my family moved to the Atlanta area in 2005. And I really missed Ohio State football. That's what I had grown up around. And my husband said you should watch the Falcons. You know, I think that you would like them. That was when Vic was the quarterback. He said they're an exciting team. And I didn't really follow the NFL prior to that point. So I started watching the Falcons, and my husband was right. They were very exciting. And so I became hooked very early. So I was here, you know, when Vic went to prison for dogfighting, and then the disastrous 2007 season. So I feel like my fanhood has been, you know, tried by fire, and it's been galvanized through all of that. But in the grand scheme, I guess about 10 years. That's how long I've been a Falcons fan.
I do like it that you're such a diehard fan of sports that you're like 10 years. That's nothing. I love it. Super awesome. And what was the motivation for you going pro? Now I'm going to just make this wild assumption that, as you said, you grew up Ohio State. I'm willing to bet there is definitely some parental influence. You know, the family is a big fan of the team there, and so you grew up with it.
Yeah.
Is that what kind of led you into being a professional sportscaster?
Well, that's accurate. I come from a sports family. My brother was a standout athlete. He played in college at Division III ball. My dad was actually a high school position coach. And so when I was growing up, I spent August mornings and afternoons at two-a-days with my dad. And so I've really, since I was very small, been around the game my entire life. I was a cheerleader, and my mom was my cheerleading coach. So everybody was involved with football in some capacity. But really, I would say that the biggest influence on me choosing to make this more of a profession was just growing up, spending all of my time on a football field with my dad, being around the game from that early age.
See, I like hearing that because as a father of a little girl myself, right now, I'm away all the time on business, and I come home and she flips out, Daddy, you know, missed you so much. And then as of recently, it's Daddy, let's watch football.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's really.
And then I have to break her little heart and be like, sweetie, it's the off season. I have nothing. And then she gets really mad, and then we end up watching whatever kid show, and it's terrible. Yeah, you take what you can get. So as you said, you've been with this team through some good times and some bad times. What is the strongest memory you have with this team? If the most impactful event or series of events as a Falcons fan?
I would have to say that right now, my fondest and strongest memory of this team would be 2012. You know, at that point, Mike Smith had been here for several years. Matt Ryan had been here for several years. And the Falcons had kind of developed a reputation of not being able to win in the playoffs. You know, that was always an issue in the Mike Smith era. And so they had gone 13-3 in 2012 and secured a first round bye. And so then they were going to play the Seahawks in the divisional round. And that was a home game, and my family went to the game. So we were there, and it was, Tony Gonzalez had never had a playoff win either. And they beat the Seahawks, and it was a thrilling game. They got out to an early lead, then the Seahawks fought back. And so it was, sort of a, end of the game, down to the wire thing. And they won. And we stayed to watch Tony Gonzalez leave the field after that win. And there were grown men all around me crying. I mean, it just was, it was really emotional. Gonzalez was really emotional. It was really exciting. And of course, then they lost the NFC Championship game. They were 10 yards from the Super Bowl. So then that part was depressing. But I would have to say that win, that playoff win, to this point is my fondest memory.
Definitely a good memory then. And I don't want you to think that I'm questioning you, but you were telling us a little bit about your credentials, and I'm just like super jazzed about it. You want to just go ahead and show off to everybody listening and tell them like how right it is that you are doing this? Because when you tell me about a little bit about what you're doing with this team, I'm just kind of floored that we got you. And this is more just like, look at what we did. Somebody valid is talking to us. Never going to happen again.
The credentials are a newer thing for our site. It's something that Dave, my editor, has worked on for a long time. And we have collectively, the writers at our site, have developed good relationships with a lot of staff members with the Falcons. And I think that we've developed a very good reputation for the quality of content that we put out. So last season was the first season that they extended credentials to us. And it was just a great experience. And it is a little bit different for me because I'm a woman. There aren't very many women there on a regular basis. And so it's not really intimidating at all. I think maybe that's because of my personality. I'm there to do a job and that sort of thing. So I'm not intimidated by it, but it is very different to be one of very few, if not the only woman there. So, but I've been able to develop good relationships with players, and I'm really looking forward to the coming season because, of course, we'll have, a mostly new coaching staff, and I'll be able to develop relationships with them from the start and that sort of thing. So it should be a lot of fun.
I am definitely happy for you to hear that. For Ron and I, our default opinion might be a little different than the norm. When we see a woman who says they're involved in sports, our automatic assumption is they have had to work so much harder and get so much more knowledge to be respected that they know way more than us. And I'm just going to keep my stupid mouth shut. And because it's like, not only will I be embarrassed by the lack of knowledge, but it'll be one of those like, maybe you go ahead and play with these shiny crayons in the corner or something there, fella. You're not, this is definitely at the little kids table on the sports Thanksgiving, as it were.
And I take any opportunity to keep Kyle quiet.
Yes, so, he does. It does not work out.
Looking back at the season, kind of getting into these meat of the questions, if you will, is you had a season. It was kind of soaked in turmoil all over the field.
Yeah.
The NFC South was a special kind of awful all year as well. But the Falcons looked to start strong at first, and then they really seemed to take a turn for the worse after that Lions game in London. But then you guys kind of picked it back up towards the end and had a shot at the playoffs, thanks to the falters of the rest of the division. But you missed the playoffs at the very end. Mike Smith goes. And looking back at the season, if you have to pick it apart, what can you say is something that was good or successful with the team last year?
Well, I think that one thing that impressed me, and again, I had kind of a unique perspective on this being in the locker room after losses and wins, is that the team never really turned on each other or the coaching staff. And so I think that was a success. I think that speaks to the character of the guys that they had on the roster, and they still stayed very cohesive. And so I think that bodes well for the future because they'll still have a strong core, even with the guys who parted free agency or whatever. They'll have that strong core group of players who can help each other through the transition of a new coaching staff. If I had to point to the biggest problem with the team, everybody's known for years this team has needed a pass rush. I mean, they've had almost no pass rush for several seasons in a row, and they really just didn't address that at all. So, rushing the passer was something that they did exceedingly poorly, and it's because they really didn't have the personnel to do it. So I'd identify that as probably the biggest problem for the team last season.
Now, this season ended with Mike Smith obviously getting fired. And it was funny for us. We're looking at the end of the year, and Ron and I were going, so the two teams who have a shot of making the playoffs are the two teams whose head coach is most likely to get fired in this division. And the two teams who are clearly not seeing any sort of postseason, their head coaches are safe, however backwards that ended up. Dan Quinn is a new head coach. Very exciting to have him coming over from Seattle. How do you feel about having him as new head coach and also the staff? Like you said, you've got a more knowledgeable perspective on this. Can you give us your take as to what we can expect and some of the pros and cons of this new head coach?
Yes. And I will be honest with you. At first, I was a little bit apprehensive about Quinn, only because the unit that he was working with in Seattle just it's stocked with talent. And Atlanta certainly does not have that kind of talent on defense at present. Obviously, they've got the draft and free agency to try to kind of fill some of those holes. But if I'm being honest, there are a lot of holes to fill. But what Quinn did excel at in Seattle is developing talent. And that's something that has kind of fallen by the wayside in Atlanta, it seemed like, with the previous coaching staff. And so I'm very hopeful that he'll be able to do more with the existing talent and also bring in some key pieces to really elevate the performance of that unit. As far as Quinn, personality-wise, I think that he's ideal. I mean, this guy has boundless enthusiasm. His love for the game is so obvious. His introductory press conference, I wanted to go out and hit somebody after he was done talking. I just think
nice,
like a great motivator. And I love his attitude. I love his emphasis on playing fast and physical. I love his plan to kind of simplify the defensive scheme because I do think that under Mike Nolan, the scheme last season was very complex. And so I think that, kind of subpar players trying to execute a complex scheme was a recipe for disaster. So I think that simplifying the scheme will sort of help to make things easier for the guys on the roster. And so, yeah, I've become very, very excited about him. I think that he was a great hire. I'm very pleased that the Falcons held out and waited for Seattle to wrap up the season so that they could get him, because I think that he is going to be very, very good.
He definitely has a very big presence, and it was definitely seen as a successful hire. The team certainly was confident. It is very unusual to see a team let go of the head coach on Black Monday and then just wait it out, especially to the end of the Super Bowl. That's pretty new.
Yeah.
Kudos to the ownership for having the confidence there. And as you said, hopefully he can go ahead and make some changes and develop the talent. As you said, you don't have a lot in pass rush. There are some needs that need to be addressed, but the team has just under 33 million roundabouts there in cap space right now. You have free agency opening on Tuesday. So do you see this team going after pass rush more in free agency? Are they going to address it in the draft? Are they going to do both? Do you see this team making a big splash in free agency, or is this going to be a more conservative offseason?
I think that because there are so many needs, and just because it's been Thomas Dimitroff's MO more so, I think that what you will see is a more conservative approach. I do not think that they will make any splashy signings. I think that they will look to both free agency and the draft to address pass rush. But I think that you'll be looking at those second tier kind of guys in free agency. I don't think that it's going to be a situation where they're going to be, trying to give the biggest names the biggest contracts, even though they could probably afford to make something like that work. I just don't see that happening. I do think I will be surprised if they don't address the pass rush with the 8th overall pick. So I do think that will be their top priority in the draft. So, but I do think because it is such a huge need, I would expect them to look to free agency and the draft to address that position.
So now I guess the assumption would be reasonable that it would be a good time to sign maybe depth, getting guys out there who are perhaps a veteran mentor, something along those lines, and really focus on having good draft position to draft well and hopefully bring up some guys that can be long-term starters. Would you say that's where you expect this team to be headed?
That is what I expect, yes.
Is Vince Wilfork something that you could kind of see them targeting? I've heard some rumors that that might be someplace he'd want to go. Warm weather, finally get out of New England, go down there, kind of hang out. He's from that area further down south in Florida and stuff. And is that something that you could foresee the team kind of going after? Kyle's talking better in leadership, and there really isn't anybody better at a pass rush standpoint or a defensive line standpoint than Vince Wilfork.
Yeah, I actually love Wilfork as a player, and I do think that he would kind of fit the type of guy that they would be looking for. The owner, Arthur Blank, and Thomas Dimitroff have both placed a real emphasis on high character, good leadership guys. That said, they are spending a very large percentage of the 2015 cap on the defensive tackle position. And so I just don't think that it would be practical, because they actually gave very large contracts last year to Paul Soliai and Tyson Jackson. And they have so much guaranteed money that it's really going to be difficult to drop either of those guys without significant dead money implications. So I think that they just have so much money already tied up in that position that it makes any defensive tackle signing very unlikely.
Now, as you already said, we know pass rush is a need, but there have got to be other areas that the team is looking to improve upon. What else can you tell us as being a definite needs improvement sort of area for this team going into next year? Potentially something that could be addressed in free agency or the draft.
Okay, this is going to be kind of a long list.
Fantastic. Go for it.
The team actually has a lot of needs. I'm going to start with inside linebacker, because it looks like Sean Weatherspoon, who was the team's first round pick a few years ago, he's hitting free agency, and it looks like they're going to let him test the market. And it seems like there's already significant interest from Arizona and also New Orleans. So it's very possible that Weatherspoon leaves. And the team, they really don't even have very many linebackers on the roster in general. And the guys that they do have at inside linebacker didn't play well. So I'd say that they have to shore up that position. And then on the other side of the ball, running back is a very clear need. They cut Steven Jackson, who never really performed. Yeah. I was really hoping that would work out great, but it just, injuries caught up with them and age, et cetera. And then Jaquiz Rogers, who was, I guess technically the second guy on the depth chart, he's also a free agent. So they basically have Devontae Freeman, who's going in his second year, who's very good, but he's not, I don't see him really as a feature back. And so they really need somebody. The new offensive coordinator is going to institute zone blocking. And so they need a very specific type of back for that. So I think that they will look to address that. I'm not sure if they will do it through the draft or free agency, but they have to do something at running back. And then they really could use at least one other receiver. And then tight end is a real need. The tight end position features heavily into Kyle Shanahan's offense. And so they really don't have anybody on the roster now who's really an impact player at that position. So that's another area. And some people have mentioned Jordan Cameron as a possibility at tight end. His injury history is a little bit troubling, but he's very talented and has an existing relationship with Shanahan. So that, I think, is a possibility. So I would identify those as the biggest needs. And then left guard. They cut Justin Blaylock, who is a veteran left guard, and guard is a really important position. The whole offensive line is important, but that interior, if you don't have a solid interior, it makes everybody else's job more difficult. So I'm not sure what their plans are going to be at left guard, whether they will look for a veteran or try to draft a replacement, but they have to address that position too.
So your needs improvement shopping cart is fairly full there.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I am a Colts fan, and I kind of feel the same way about my team. So yeah, it's fun times. All right, let's talk about Matt Ryan for a bit. Everybody loves talking quarterback. He is definitely a good quarterback. Sometimes he is a great quarterback, but over the last couple of years, he's not really been impressive, especially when you consider his past success. His rookie season definitely was impressive and a cause for so much hope. And we always see some drop off. If you get a rookie in and nobody knows what to expect, you can maybe surprise the people. But at what point are we going to be able to, I mean, we got to be rapidly approaching the point as fans saying, maybe he is not as good as we thought he was. And what is it going to be for him in the future? Is he really as good? Is there external factors in his struggle? I mean, help me figure out what is going on with Matt Ryan.
Yeah, I think that if you, the best measure of a quarterback's success, and I mean, it's an imperfect measure, but it's the best way to compare a quarterback's performance to other quarterbacks. It's statistics. And Ryan has, even in these down years, he's been statistically very good. If you look at his performance in 2013, you have to be realistic about the fact that the offensive line was one of the worst in the NFL. They had catastrophic injuries. And then also his two top receivers were injured. Julio Jones went on IR early in the season. Roddy White was dealing with a high ankle sprain that was left over from preseason and then ended up with, I think, a hamstring injury after that hobbled him for the rest of the season. So 2013, I would say that the injuries to his key players and then also just the poor play of the offensive line, he was under pressure so much. It made it really difficult for him to succeed. Last year, there were fewer sacks, but it looked to me like it was because Ryan had adjusted his release time because he was under almost as much pressure. And so I think that continued to be a problem for him in the 2014 season. But I think that overall, if you look back at those early seasons with Michael Turner being able to run the ball effectively, and then you look at 2013 and 2014, they've had a really subpar run game. And it's been for a multitude of reasons. Run blocking hasn't been great. The running backs haven't been great at finding holes and things like that. But I think that not having any balance has been really detrimental to his game because they know that defenses know that he has to pass. I mean, he doesn't have another choice because they can stop the run. They're not letting them get anything on the ground. So that lets them really kind of pin their ears back and come after him. It lets defenses generate more pressure. It helps the secondary cover more effectively because they know he's going to have to throw the ball. So I think that, the thing that has been the most problematic for Ryan has been the lack of a running game, no balance whatsoever. So hopefully if they address that position and they're able to get somebody in and with this change in scheme, if they're able to run the ball more effectively, I do think that you'll see an improvement in Ryan's play.
Now, you brought up the fact that he had to adjust his throwing style and speed and release time. Mm-hmm. One thing I brought up throughout the season, actually very early in the season to Kyle, was that the previous year, his offensive line had been so horrible that people were worried that he was going to be playing scared.
Yeah.
And after watching a few of the games, I turned to Kyle and I said, you know what? I think he's actually just getting it out faster. Like, I don't think it's a scared thing. Like, everything looks designed. And I said that coaching staff at that time had done a really good job of knowing what they had on the offensive line and getting Matt Ryan to change his playing style in order to compensate for that problem. Like, I'm a big time Bears fan. And the offensive line for the Bears had always been a big issue for the Bears. I watched countless quarterbacks constantly just get torn apart back there, and nobody ever adjusted the play call or the play scheme or anything like that to adjust for the fact that nobody could block anything.
Yeah.
And I thought that if there was one thing that coaching staff did before they were fired was they were able to do that. And that was very impressive to me because most teams aren't willing to admit that they have that problem.
Yeah. Well, I agree. And I'm glad that you noticed it too, because I think that that's really kind of an underrated thing that the coaching staff did last year. It was something that I noticed. Ryan was getting that ball out in like 1.5, 2 seconds because that's all the pocket that he had. And so it was impressive to me just the way that Ryan adapted because that's not an easy thing to do. And it was impressive to me that the coaching staff helped him adapt to that. So I do think that, though, if they are able to get anything going on the ground, they'll have and he will have an easier time.
Just you're talking running back. We're going to get into Steven Jackson here in a second because we have a lot of comments about that. But what would you think if they were able to get a hold of Todd Gurley and kind of a hometown favorite there already in Georgia? Would that be something that like the fans would just lose their minds over?
Oh my gosh. I mean, well, the Falcons fans who are Georgia fans are already saying things like, you could use the 8th overall pick on Gurley, and I don't agree with that. But I do think that Gurley is a very special player. I have enjoyed watching him in college, and yeah, I mean, if the Falcons landed him, I'd be thrilled to have him. Obviously not in the first round, but, later on.
Well, what about the possibility of trading down to, say, the mid-20s or so and acquiring him at like 25?
the Falcons have so many needs, as I listed, that I would not be opposed to trading back in the draft and, acquiring more picks or whatever. I mean, I do think that that would be a completely acceptable way to fill a significant need.
Now, I do want to go back to something we were just recently talking about. You did mention that one of the best ways to measure a quarterback is by statistics, and I'm going to use that as an opportunity to be a jackass and just say we got to be careful with this, because looking at statistics, oftentimes Jay Cutler is a good quarterback, right, Ron? Your laughter is the correct response.
I had to actually sit all the way back up and unmute my mic just to scold you. Thank you.
I love it. Okay. Going back to being productive now. When Steven Jackson was released, the exact statement was less effective than anticipated. And that kind of struck us as confusing, because on our show, we had talked at length about how he needed to be gone last year. And there was this weird dedication to him, despite the production just not being there. So you're in the locker room, you're in the media room, you're able to get a much better view than the average fan. What was it about this guy that had him stick around? I mean, how did he manage that despite the lack of production?
I think that it's a couple of things. One of the biggest criticisms of the Mike Smith and Thomas Dimitroff regime was they were sometimes overly loyal to their players. And, oftentimes that was detrimental. So I think that was part of it. I think that everybody respects what Jackson has been able to do over the course of his career. I mean, he's one of the best, he in his prime. So I do think that to some extent it was loyalty and respect for Jackson and for the things that he had done in this league. But I think that also, it was veteran leadership. Again, that's something that this team has placed such a high priority on over the years. And he's a good locker room guy. He works hard. He does everything that the coaching staff asks him to. He was respected by the younger guys. So I think that probably it was a combination of those factors. But the reality is he probably should have been cut after last season. And they should have looked for a long-term solution there.
You can't be too upset with Devontae Freeman, though. I mean, he has been good when he was able to play. And I remember watching the Bears game when the Bears played the Falcons this year, and watching, just
watching the Bears dismantle the Falcons. Yeah.
They did dismantle them. But the one thing and granted, the Bears have a really weak run defense, but one thing that I just could not understand while watching the game was, why are they coming at us with Steven Jackson? They could be killing us right now if they were playing any other running back right now.
Yep.
And I just did not understand it. And it was just, I wasn't mad at the time, obviously, because I'm a Bears fan and I want them to win.
And you needed that little leg up with the Cutler and all that.
Yeah, with the team and the coach and the organization and everybody there that's involved with the Bears. So
I'm sorry, it's a compulsion. I can't stop myself from ripping on my friend.
Now, you talked about injuries. This has kind of been an issue with the Falcons over the last few seasons, really. It just seems like you guys seem to get injured more than most teams. And I don't know if that's just because your depth is not there as it is with other teams, and so we notice it more, or is it that the injuries are just always piling up and there's nothing you can do, and the depth is just wiped out no matter what? What has been happening there? Was it a coaching thing? Was it a player's determination thing? Was it, even the staff, the medical staff that they keep on there? What has been going on there that causes the Atlanta players to have so many injuries?
This is a really interesting question, and it's one that Falcons fans have really been trying to get to the bottom of for a couple of years. The team parted ways with their strength and conditioning staff, I guess, prior to the 2013 season. And up until that point, they had been pretty lucky in terms of injuries. And so with this current strength and conditioning group, in 2013 and 2014, it has just been a nightmare scenario. So I do think that the change in whatever their approach is to strength and conditioning, I do think that has been a factor because it's been so significant that it can't be coincidental. the other aspect is, for some of these guys, it's just age catching up with them. I mean, Steven Jackson had a really hard time overcoming some soft tissue injuries. Same thing for Roddy. I'm older than those guys. I know I have a harder time recovering from, muscle strains and things like that at this point than I did in my 20s. So I understand. So I think that to some extent it's that. And then I also think, what I mentioned earlier about the team not necessarily doing a great job of developing the talent that they have. I think that that's what you see. I think that the depth wasn't up to par because of a combination of just less talent and not being developed properly or thoroughly. So I think that the reason that it was so catastrophic was just a perfect storm of those three factors.
Now, it's not just the injuries all around, but more importantly, the defense. And we have seen not only has your defense struggled in pass rush, but the injuries haven't helped you out at all either there.
Right.
And it's been a big issue for the last few years. It just seems like no matter what you guys do, you can't get great young players. And the aging players that you do get that are kind of past their prime, but very good additions seem to just drop off a production cliff. And will it be any different this year? And why? Are we looking at bringing in only free agents that can contribute right now, that have, zero to very little injury history? And are we talking they're going after rookies in the draft that are going to be tough players that haven't had any issues in the past as well?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer just because they've kind of restructured the front office. And so they've reallocated responsibilities. Now, Scott Pioli is responsible for scouting and assessing, potential free agents and then players in the draft. And then Thomas Dimitroff is managing the cap, and he's got final say on who the team drafts and who they bring in as free agents. And then Dan Quinn is actually, and his staff, it seems like they've been very involved as well. And so the wild card there is really Dan Quinn's involvement. I don't know, aside from his catchphrase, fast and physical, that's the kind of, those are the players that he's looking for, players who are fast and physical. Aside from that, we really don't know what he's looking for. We really don't know what his standards are. And so I think that we will learn a lot once free agency opens and we get a better sense of which players the team is going to target. Because at this point, without really knowing much about, his preferences, et cetera, it's very hard to answer that question just because I do know he's been heavily involved and he's been very collaborative with Dimitroff up to this point. And I just don't know what his priorities are aside from players who can play fast and play physical. He's made that part abundantly clear. So.
Right. Now, being in the NFC South, you definitely have to feel like there's always a chance at a playoff run. And especially where the team is at with a new head coach, there's got to be a lot of optimism. But what is it really going to take to make this team a playoff or even Super Bowl contender? And if not this year, how long are we talking about with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to 2007 when, things were really abysmal. And then they hired Mike Smith and, people were optimistic that they would turn things around and, got a rookie quarterback and people thought, well, we don't really know what to expect. And then the team went 11-5. So, that was certainly a big turnaround. I don't know if that's representative of what typically happens with the regime change. And so I think the team has a lot of needs. They're really, they've got to shore up that defense. They have to at least field an adequate defense. And that's something they haven't done for the last 2 years. And, they have to balance out the offense. And I think that if they balance out the offense, give Matt Ryan adequate protection, get something going on the ground just enough to keep defenses honest. And if they're able to stop the run and get some pressure on opposing quarterbacks, I mean, I think that getting back to a winning season is certainly attainable. Whether or not that's going to be good enough for a playoff bid in the NFC South, I mean, the way that the division was last year, a 9-win season would have won the division easily. So You never know. Every season is different as far as that. But yeah, I mean, I think that I would expect them to return to a winning season next year. I don't know if that'll be good enough for a playoff bid. I don't know if, I just don't know beyond that. But I do think that if they can correct those things, they have at least the receiving talent, and Matt Ryan is good enough, I think, to win 9 games.
Now, we already talked, actually, our very first interview that we put out was with Sander Phillips, the editor of BucksNation.com. And we briefly talked with him about that team holding the number 1 overall pick, and obviously the massive implications that has. You are the first person we've talked to also in the same division. And so I want to get your take. Is there any kind of concern? I mean, looking at the Saints, the Bucks, and the Panthers, there are some threats within each of those teams, but then there's also massive weaknesses. So is there any massive concern from your perspective from within the division as a team that is very well poised to be a division winner and keep the Falcons down?
You know, the team that I am most concerned about at this point is probably the Bucks. I really think that Lovie Smith is a very good coach. And I don't know if you agree.
Nope.
His time in Chicago, I love him as a coach. And I mean, he won 10 games the season that Chicago fired him, if I'm remembering correctly.
But that's all he could do, though. He could win you a bunch of regular season games. That's what he could do.
I love how Ron is not even hiding the venom in his voice right now. That's it. As long as I've been a friend of Ron, and this goes a ways back, even when the team was doing well, he was not a fan of Lovie Smith.
Never have been.
So I think that's a Midwestern thing. My husband is he's a Wisconsin native and he's a Green Bay fan, and so he is so negative about the team. It doesn't matter how good they are. He's negative about Aaron Rodgers. He's negative about Mike McCarthy. I mean, they have been contenders year after year after year, and he's very pessimistic about it.
I'm going to agree with you that is a Midwestern thing, because Ron is much higher on Aaron Rodgers than he ever would be on his own team, and I think that's just that preparation for disappointment or something like that.
That's exactly what it is. We know what's right around the corner. We're from the Midwest. We have tornadoes and lots of corn, and it's always cold, and so we know what's coming. And so we have insight, and when we don't have insight, then we create our own negative insight, and that's an unfortunate thing. But Kyle's right. We tend to have more optimism for our opposing teams than we do for our own.
Yes, and being from Ohio, I grew up surrounded by Browns and Bengals fans, and I know that they're the same way. So,
but Browns fans have a reason to be.
Browns, let's not make that's its own can of worms. But we derailed you a little bit, and I apologize. I want to hear you talk about the Bucks and how they may or may not be a threat.
Well, I don't know if you remember Thursday Night Football Week 3 last season. That was the Falcons' best win of the season, but also the best win of the last several years. I mean, they just completely destroyed Tampa Bay. It was like 56-14, and the first team players held them to 0 points. So they had taken the starters out because, I mean, it just was such a ridiculous lead. And then when we played the Bucks later in the season, they were much improved. You know, I think that it took some time to implement a new scheme and to kind of get the players on board and get, everybody kind of understanding what was expected and working well together. And so I think that they will just be more comfortable in that scheme this year. And I think that will help. And quarterback has been such a glaring weakness for them these past several seasons. I can't even think of his name. Josh McCown.
He
Josh
came from
McCown
Chicago too.
Yes. And then Mike Glennon. And I mean, it's been such a weakness. And so I think that they'll end up with either Marcus Mariota or Jameis Winston. And either one of those guys is going to be a significant upgrade over who they've had under center these past several years. So I think that will really go a long way toward helping them be more successful. I do expect them to be much improved this season.
Definitely in line with your analysis there. Now we're getting to the point where we're running up against the clock, so we're going to start winding down. Now we briefly talked about the draft, and we talked about pass rush and the possibility of taking a running back with a torn ACL with the number 8 overall, and just wouldn't everybody love that? But can you give us a little insight? Looking over the fan comments on the website, is there somebody that the fans are really pulling for that really is, you get to that point where mob mentality kicks in and everybody says, this is the guy? Do you have anybody that the fans are pulling for, or is it just best player available at a position of need?
What's funny is that I think that people were mostly of one accord last year. And, that was Jadeveon Clowney. I think that most of our fans wanted Clowney. And then, there was a smaller contingent that wanted Khalil Mack out of Buffalo. And this year it's been kind of interesting because I think people are still kind of honed in on that edge rusher. So, you see Vic Beasley's name out of Clemson. You see him mentioned pretty regularly. Randy Gregory is another guy that comes up. And so those are kind of the names that I've seen tossed around the most.
Fantastic. Definitely have to feel like you dodged a bullet with that Jadeveon Clowney thing, because trading up to get him, it would have been expensive. And Jake Matthews is he's a franchise left tackle. Oh, yeah.
That position is set for years to come. And so I think that was really the smart move.
He definitely looked very capable out there. So that's got to be a good feeling to say, as you said, there's always questions, but knowing you have that left tackle position, that's a great big sigh of relief all the time. Now, realistically, looking forward to this next season, what should be the high hopes? And I guess, what should a fan expect looking ahead to next year? I mean, the worst they can do, the best they can do in a realistic sort of viewpoint.
Well, when you look at their schedule, I think that the Falcons have the easiest schedule in the league next season.
They do. Yes.
Yeah. So, and that's of course based on the win percentages from 2014, but and so things will change incrementally, but just on paper, it shouldn't be hard to get to 500. Especially when you also look at, obviously the Falcons had a very bad season last season, but they also had some close games that they really could have won. And so, and it was the same thing in 2013. They had some close games that they could have and should have won. So I really think that, this will be at worst case scenario, a 7 to 8 win team. I think that their ceiling is high. If they can get any pressure on opposing quarterbacks, if they can balance out the offense, all those things that I said before, I really think that they could be very successful next season, especially with such an easy schedule.
Well, let's certainly hope so. Definitely you're looking to see a lot of improvement. And it was good to hear you say that at the beginning of the interview. You were saying, despite the struggles of the year, in the locker room, there was cohesion, and that's got to be a great thing going forward. Definitely gives you at least that feeling of hope that the players are happy to be there and they want to play hard. That in itself is so massive.
Yes.
So right now, I'm going to open the floor up to you. Give you a chance to tell folks about yourself, your interests, and the Falcoholic and your Twitter handle. All that. Give us what you think we need to know.
Okay. Well, on Twitter, I'm at Jeanna Thomas, and it's spelled Jeanna. The site is thefalcoholic.com. And as you mentioned earlier, it's part of SB Nation's family of blogs. And I also write for a site called Land Grant Holy Land, which is SB Nation's Ohio State blog. So if you're interested in college football or Ohio State, or you hate Ohio State and you want to hate read some of our stuff, you can check that out as well. I
will say college does bring out a lot more violent emotions. And
yes, it does.
That's why we stay away from college football for the most part, because we don't need those fans finding us.
That's understandable. I really only get hate mail about things that I write for the Ohio State blog.
Wow.
Yeah.
That just goes to show you the kind of fans that you have when it comes to the Falcons, though, that are just like, you know what? She's right. And we're sensible, and we understand where she's coming from, and it sounds like you have some pretty realistic fans when it comes to the Falcons, but we all know what happens in college football.
Oh yes.
I mean, I got enough hate coming my way from the Seahawks and the Patriots and if I'm being honest.
Kyle instigates his own hate, is what he does.
Yeah. So, for the most part, I'm not going to pretend like I don't, but it's all in good fun. So, well, definitely appreciate great time picking your brain. And I am certainly hoping that you're going to be willing to come on and join us again, especially right after the draft. We are definitely going to want to get your reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love that.
Yeah, we would love to have you back on. It's by far one of the best interviews we've had so far. I was really excited to have you, and it obviously it paid off in a big way.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Thank you so much. Jeanna Thomas, the Falcoholic. Once again, that was Jeanna Thomas, staff author of the Falcoholic.com. I think that was a fantastic interview. That lady knows her stuff, man.
Like I said before we started recording, and like you said during the interview, Kyle, especially when it comes to a woman, you have to really know your stuff to be respected, and she knows. And listening to her talk about the credentials that she has and being able to go in the locker room and talk to the players, and she's already talked to Dan Quinn and the people that she knows already there at that organization, she is a great addition to the contacts for us. Like, I cannot wait to have her on after the draft, and we're going to be picking her brain, at least through email and through Twitter, trying to figure out what she thinks about certain things.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll say, on a more personal level, it's really kind of cool. You know, when she's talking about football, it's not just a sport, it's a family thing for her. You know, her brothers are in sports, and her dad is in sports. And, you know, I got a little girl, I want her to watch football. And so for me, it was really cool to see this isn't just something she does, it's something she loves. And that was very evident. And that is an awesome thing to talk with anybody, man or woman, who has a true love in their heart for the game, as she did. And it makes it that much better when it's not just, yeah, woo, go Falcons, I'm gonna go ahead and drink this 40. It's, oh yes, Falcons, I am all about this. I am going to cry sweet, salty tears of joy because that was a beautiful touchdown.
Yeah, she has everything worked out in her head. I know that I'm a big Bears fan, and I seem to know everything that there is to know about them, and you pretty much the same thing with the Colts. And that comes with fandom. She is a true fan. She's not just writing about the Falcons. She lives the Falcons. So that's what separates her from a lot of different journalists.
Works the Falcons. It's not, I mean, right. You start throwing money at me and telling me, Kyle, your job is to go ahead and hang out, with the Colts. Yeah, I can do that. She gets to do that like every day. That is super rad. I do not know how we tricked her into.
Well, it kind of fell into our lap because we sent the emails to her editor, and her editor, he recommended her, and now I know why. Obviously, it's glaring why he recommended her, and it just I'm beside myself a little bit when it comes to the interview we just did. I'm very, very happy with everything, and yeah, that's all I really got. I mean, we could sit here and talk about how great she is for hours, but we actually have to get ready for our next one too.
we certainly do. We have. You know what? I am very happy that we have gotten every single person we've interviewed has been very knowledgeable about their team. We have been very lucky. And now we're getting to the point where we're even getting professionals. This is insanity. We are very lucky. Everybody, thank you for listening to us. Ron and Keil for FBIA Podcast. Football is America. Thank you for listening.
Good night.